Well, hey, it's Ella. Today we're going to be talking about something extra important, and I'm not talking Miley Cyrus's new music video important, and I'm not talking your cousin getting engaged important. No, I'm talking about 4 structures that make up all living stuff and help grow and sustain all living stuff. It doesn't matter if you are a penguin or a tardigrade or Barack Obama, you need this stuff. These crazy little structures are called macromolecules. They are essential to all life ever. They provide energy and help to store that energy and provide instructions to further generations on how to be born and grow. They are the most basic ingredients to all living things. So what are these amazing molecules, you ask? You might have heard of them before. They're carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Maybe you saw them on your Doritos bag or something? It's no coincidence that this stuff is classified the same way we classify food. It's basically food for everything ever. The first and most basic macromolecule is the carbohydrate. You've probably heard of them. While eating that carb-heavy bag of Doritos might not have been the healthiest idea, carbs are super important. Like, give energy to all the organisms. Ever important. The most basic of all the sugars in the land is the monosaccharide. Mono meaning one, and saccharide meaning sugar. The one to really remember is glucose. It is the most basic of all the monosaccharides. It is found in plants, like this leaf, who get their energy from the sun. So it's a very basic form of energy. There are lots of other kinds of monosaccharides too, like fructose, which has the same structure as glucose, it's just used by organisms in a different way. And also ribose, and basically anything that ends with ose. What about how my cousin was proposed to and hose and oppose? What I'm trying to say here is that anything that ends with OSE in biology is probably a sugar. And then there are disaccharides. If you pass Latin for preschoolers, you probably figure out that that means 2 sugars. They're basically just 2 monosaccharides stuck together. Mono and disaccharides are basically just little energy nuggets that help keep your body up and running and strong so you can go to Wawa and get more Doritos. And also there are the very complicated polysaccharides. You guessed it, that means many sugars. These molecules are a lot bigger than mono and disaccharides. They're huge, huge chains that are like building blocks for things like plant fibers. And also starches, in potatoes and stuff. Well, that's a polysaccharide. Human beings are great and all, but they can't store energy the same way plants do, which is why we have something called glycogen. It is a lot like starch, just more complicated and branchy, like trees. Again, this glycogen is short-term energy. It doesn't last very terribly long, which is why we have lipids, or fat! Poor fat. People are always trying to lose it. And while maybe you could live without that extra flab from all those Doritos, fat is actually really essential to organisms too. Lipids look a lot like carbohydrates, except they are a little more small and simple. Their most distinct property is that they're hydrophobic, or scared of water, kind of the way that I'm scared of spiders. But anyway, lipids have non-polar bonds, and water has polar bonds, so you can imagine they don't really get along. This hydrophobia is important because it distinguishes fat from carbohydrates. The 2 main ingredients in lipids are fatty acids, which are long carbon chains that are capped by little carboxyl groups, and glycerol, which is a type of alcohol. It's not that kind of alcohol, and I believe you are underage. These fats come in 3 varieties: saturated, unsaturated, and trans. In an unsaturated fat, though, there are 2 little carbons that haven't been saturated by any hydrogen, so there's a bend in them. A good example of this is olive oil. No matter how hard you try, olive oil will not be a solid at room temperature. The last kind is a trans fat, which are basically saturated fats, but they're perfectly straight and extra super duper terrible for you. Don't eat them, ever. But what if they're in Doritos? The next macromolecule is protein, yay! Perhaps you've told a vegetarian before that they're gonna die because they don't get enough protein. Well, let me tell you something. You're gonna die because all you ever eat is Doritos. Proteins do all sorts of really awesome stuff like restore body tissues and support the immune system and carry materials through the body and control the speed of reactions like in enzymes and regulate homeostasis, just like all sorts of really cool stuff. And the amazing thing is that they do all of this using only 20 basic molecules called amino acids. Amino acids are a monomer, so they have a pretty basic structure. On the one end, there's a carboxyl group, kind of like in fatty acids. On the other end, there's an amino group which contain nitrogen. This is really important because our bodies need nitrogen, and the only way we can get it is through protein-rich foods. In between those two, there's a side group that has some sort of varied molecule. There are 20 different kinds of side groups and 20 different kinds of amino acids. Coincidence? I think not. It's the side group that gives amino acids their variation. For example, there's leucine and serine, which are different because of the atoms in the side group. When amino acids bond, it's called a peptide bond. Proteins form when peptide bonds are in really specific formations. These formations can be spirals or folds and look a lot like sculptures or Doritos. The last kind of bond is the nucleic acid. Nucleic acids have all the same elements as proteins and carbs and fats, except they have phosphorus too. Nucleic acids have 3 parts. The first is a sugar, specifically ribose, that special carbohydrate we talked about earlier. The second is a phosphate group. And the last is a nitrogen-containing base, which is a base that has nitrogen. These 3 come together in a marriage of awesomeness and create DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA ribonucleic acid, all that stuff that makes you your fabulous Dorito-loving self. Now we know about macromolecules. It's great. They're fun. I encourage you to wholeheartedly love them and participate in them because they do a lot of stuff for you. And Doritos.